Whose idea was it to leave the back door open? Caleb barked, storming into the hallway with his pajama pants still half tucked. His voice cut through the night like glass. Alina flinched, cradling her phone with shaking fingers, desperately trying to find the baby monitor signal, but the screen stayed black. It wasn't me, she snapped. I locked it. I double-checked before bed. Her voice cracked into panic. Where is Liam? It was 3:07 a.m. The nursery was empty, the crib rail down, the blankets pushed aside as if someone had peeled the baby from them without a sound, and the only clue was the trail, dragged across the carpet and onto the cold floor, tiny fibers bent where small toes had passed. But it wasn't just that. It was the scratches on the hardwood, deep, frantic ones, from claws. Caleb and Alina stood frozen for a breathless second, the weight of horror sinking in. Their 1-year-old son, missing, and so was Thor, the 90-pound German shepherd they had rescued a year ago. The same dog Caleb had never trusted, the one he warned might snap one day. He's still half wild, he'd said more than once. You can see it in his eyes. Alina rushed toward the back door, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was wide open, swaying slightly in the wind. Beyond it, the night stretched into a shadowed yard, and past that, only fields and silence. Thor took him, Caleb muttered, eyes narrowing. I knew it. I knew this would happen. No, Alina gasped, shaking her head. No, Thor would never hurt him. He sleeps next to the crib every night. He watches Liam like he's his own pup. But reason had no place in panic. Caleb was already halfway to the truck, grabbing his flashlight, slipping on boots. You stay here in case they come back. I'll find him, he barked, his voice trembling more than he would admit. But Alina didn't listen. She grabbed the baby blanket from the crib and ran out barefoot. The dew-covered grass soaked her feet as she reached the yard, calling out both names. Liam! Thor! Until her voice cracked into sobs. A flicker of movement caught her eye near the woods. Not far, just beyond the fence line where the ground dipped. The flashlight in Caleb's hand caught the reflection of 2 eyes, golden, unmoving, watching. Thor stood in the distance, just past the trees, his chest heaving. Something small dangled from his mouth, not limp, not lifeless, but moving. Liam. The dog was holding the baby gently by the back of his onesie, dragging him slowly through the grass like a lioness carrying her cub. Liam wasn't crying. In fact, he looked half asleep, head bobbing slightly, thumb in his mouth. Thor paused when he saw them, his ears back, his posture low but not afraid, protective, defensive, and behind him, Alina's breath stopped. Smoke, not just a wisp, not someone burning leaves. It was thick, curling up from behind their house, rising fast. The nursery! She screamed, spinning on her heel. Caleb didn't wait for an explanation. He sprinted past her, straight toward the house, his voice caught in his throat. Within seconds, the smoke alarms began to wail. A fire had started in the wall, faulty wiring from an old baby monitor cord, the firefighters would later say. It had sparked behind the dresser, smoldered for hours, and finally caught onto the curtains. Had Thor not reacted, the fire would have reached the crib in minutes, maybe less. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that Thor, feared, doubted, nearly returned to the shelter 6 months ago, had sniffed the smoke before any detector and made a decision no one saw coming. He hadn't barked. He hadn't panicked. He had taken the baby in his jaws and left. As Alina reached him, tears streaming down her face, Thor lowered Liam gently to the ground and whimpered, nudging the baby's cheek with his nose. The boy stirred, blinked at the night sky, and smiled. Thor sat back, tail thumping once, as if to say, "He's safe. I did what I had to." And in that moment, everything changed. Not just for Thor, but for the people who thought they knew what loyalty looked like, and learned instead what love could do when it had fur, fangs, and the heart of a guardian. Alina dropped to her knees beside Thor, unable to stop her hands from shaking as she scooped Liam into her arms. The baby blinked sleepily, then smiled, blissfully unaware of how close he had come to never waking up again. Thor remained beside her, still panting, his eyes wide and alert, but no longer wild. In his gaze was something ancient, an instinct beyond training, a protective force that needed no words. Caleb arrived seconds later, breathless, sweat-drenched, eyes darting between the baby and the rising column of smoke. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then he simply knelt beside them, resting a trembling hand on Thor's head. They sat like that for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, until the sirens screamed in the distance and the blaze roared louder behind them. Neighbors began gathering, drawn by the smoke and the confusion, but Alina didn't notice them. All she could see was Liam's chest rising and falling, safe. All she could feel was Thor's warm breath against her arm. Later, while the fire department extinguished the last of the smoldering nursery, the chief pulled Caleb aside. "You're lucky that dog woke up. Smoke alarms didn't even trigger until the flames were high. You'd be planning a funeral right now if he hadn't acted." Caleb nodded slowly, words caught in his throat. Guilt tightened around him like a noose. How many times had he insisted Thor was a risk? How many times had he told Alina they should rehome him before something bad happens? But the only bad thing that had happened tonight was what would have happened if Thor wasn't there. Back inside, Alina cradled Liam, watching as a firefighter knelt beside Thor and gently examined him. The dog had cuts on his paws, probably from broken glass, and his chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. He'd inhaled smoke, too. When the firefighter tried to coax him onto a stretcher, Thor growled weakly and refused to move until his eyes found Alina again. She whispered softly, "It's okay, boy. We're going with you." Only then did he relax. At the animal hospital, Thor was treated like a hero. The vet was stunned. "This dog didn't just act on instinct," she said. "He made a choice. He didn't run. He went back for the baby." Alina stayed by his side all night, holding Liam in one arm, her other hand resting on Thor's neck. Even in sleep, the dog twitched at every creak of the door, always facing her and the baby, always between them and the world. When Caleb returned, the next morning, his shoulders sagged with the weight of all the things he hadn't said before. Things like sorry and thank you, and I was wrong. He sank into the chair beside Alina, looked at Thor, and said in a hushed voice, "I owe him everything." Alina didn't speak. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there in silence, together but changed. The news spread quickly. A local reporter ran the story with the headline, "Hero Dog Rescues Baby from Fire." People flooded social media with praise. Offers came in to adopt Thor, to sponsor his medical care, even to give him a medal. But Alina refused them all. "He's not for sale. He's family." They brought Thor home 3 days later. He was weak, a little slower, but he followed Liam's scent like a compass and curled up at the base of the crib the moment they stepped inside. Liam giggled and reached for his fur, babbling nonsense. Thor let him, eyes closing slowly, as if this quiet, this safety, was the reward. Caleb, changed by the weight of that night, built a new wooden plaque above the nursery door. Carved into it were the words, "Protected by Thor." And it wasn't just decoration, it was truth. Because Thor wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian, a creature with teeth and instincts, yes, but also with judgment, love and loyalty deeper than most people would ever understand. As Liam grew older, the story became legend in the neighborhood. Kids would visit just to see the dog who saved a baby. But for Alina and Caleb, the story never dulled, it only deepened. Every time Liam ran into Thor's arms, every time the dog stood at the window when strangers passed by, every time the fire flickered in their memories, so did gratitude. Because sometimes the ones you doubt the most are the ones who save you, and sometimes the bond between a child and a dog doesn't start with a game of fetch. It starts in fire and ends in forever. The smell of smoke lingered in their hair long after the fire had been put out. Alina sat on the hospital bench, rocking Liam gently against her chest, his tiny fingers curled around her necklace. Caleb stood a few feet away, staring blankly at the vending machine, not because he wanted anything, but because he couldn't bear to look at his wife, at his son, and think about what could have happened, what almost happened. They had just watched Thor being wheeled away on a gurney, his vitals stable, but his breathing shallow. The vet said it would take time for his lungs to recover from the smoke, but the burns on his paws were worrying. He hadn't whimpered once, even while his skin was being treated. He just kept his eyes locked on Liam, refusing to rest until the baby was in Alina's arms again. Caleb hadn't said much since they arrived, and Alina could feel the distance growing between them. Not because they blamed each other, but because the fear had left them both speechless. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice low and uneven. If he hadn't pulled Liam out, Alina closed her eyes. "I know. He could have just run." The door was open. He had every reason to run, but he didn't. Her voice cracked, thick with emotion. He ran into the flames. The room fell into silence again. It wasn't just that Thor had saved Liam. It was how he did it. He hadn't barked. He hadn't panicked. He had dragged Liam out through the hallway gently, with such precision that the baby barely stirred. Then he returned and paced frantically until Alina followed. It was like something out of a storybook, but this wasn't fiction. It was real, and the memory of it played in a loop behind her eyelids every time she blinked. Later that evening, as they returned home, the charred remains of the nursery made Caleb's breath catch. Half the roof had collapsed. The crib was melted into a grotesque shape. The cause, faulty wiring in a wall socket. It had sparked in the middle of the night, igniting a small flame that spread along the curtain like a fuse. The smoke alarm had malfunctioned. They never heard it. They would have slept through the entire thing. Alina walked through the blackened hallway slowly, holding Liam tightly as he blinked around, unbothered. But Thor's scent was everywhere, from the scratch marks on the floor to the trail of blood, where he'd scraped his paws dragging the baby out. She knelt and touched the floor, feeling the roughness of it. He didn't hesitate, she whispered. They moved Liam's things into the spare room, what used to be the office. Caleb spent the entire night installing a new set of alarms, fire-resistant barriers, and motion-sensing lights. It was a flurry of movement, a desperate attempt to make the home feel safe again. But Alina knew safety now wore fur and had 4 legs. The next morning they returned to the animal hospital. Thor was awake, bandaged and groggy, but alert. When Liam gurgled softly in Alina's arms, Thor's ears twitched, and his tail gave a weak thump against the bedding. The vet, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Jensen, smiled. He's lucky, and so are you. He knew exactly what he was doing. Alina crouched beside the table and pressed her forehead to Thor's. You didn't just save him, she whispered. You saved us. The room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, like standing in a church or hearing someone's heartbeat for the first time. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Liam, just 7 months old, began to crawl, and wherever he crawled, Thor followed, dragging his weak limbs with him, never letting the baby out of sight. It was as if they were tethered by something invisible, something neither fire nor fear could touch. One night, Alina walked into the room to find Liam asleep beside Thor on the rug, his small fingers buried in the dog's thick fur, and Thor's eyes blinking slowly, watchful. Content. Caleb stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes wet. I misjudged him, he said softly. All those times, I thought he was too much, too unpredictable. He was just waiting, Alina replied, her voice trembling, waiting for the moment. We'd need him most. That night, they made a decision. Thor wasn't just a pet. He wasn't just a rescue. He was family. And for the first time since the fire, they slept, really slept, knowing that if anything ever threatened their son, again, Thor would be there. Not because he was trained, not because it was instinct, but because he loved them. Because once, at 3 a.m., when no one else could hear the danger coming, he did, and he chose to save them, even if it meant breaking himself in the process. Days following Thor's heroism blurred into one long thread of exhaustion and awe. Caleb found himself staring at the dog more often than usual, watching how Thor's gaze never left Liam, even when he was groggy from the pain meds. It was like the shepherd had absorbed the trauma and made it his mission to guard what innocence was left. Thor had always been intense, always protective, but this was something deeper, more sacred, and Caleb couldn't deny it anymore. He hadn't rescued Thor all those years ago. Thor had been waiting for the right moment to rescue them. Alina, on the other hand, clung tightly to Liam every night. She kept the baby monitor on full volume, checked the fire alarms twice before bed, and still jolted awake at the creak of the wind. The trauma hadn't left her. It had simply folded itself into her habits. What scared her most wasn't the fire. It was how close they'd come to losing everything without even realizing it. One afternoon, while Thor rested on a padded bed in the living room, a visitor arrived. It was Officer Perez, the first responder who had seen them outside their burning home that night. He had watched in disbelief as Caleb handed over the baby and then turned back to carry out the injured dog, refusing to leave Thor behind. Now he stood in their living room holding a sealed envelope and a look of something between admiration and disbelief. I had to come, Perez said, nodding toward Thor. I put in a call to the mayor's office. There's talk of honoring him publicly. Caleb exchanged a glance with Alina. He doesn't need a medal. No, Perez agreed. But maybe the rest of the world needs to see what he did, especially now. With so many stories about dangerous dogs, aggressive breeds, people abandoning them. This could remind people that sometimes the one you fear most is the one who'll save you. That night, after Perez left, Caleb sat beside Thor and whispered, "You never gave up on us, even when I gave up on you." Thor's tail thumped once, slow but firm. He licked Caleb's hand and then shifted his head just enough to see Liam, playing with blocks on the rug. The bond between them was growing fast. Liam would crawl, Thor would follow. Liam would cry. Thor would nudge a toy toward him or press his nose against the boy's cheek until the tears stopped. It was uncanny, like he understood far more than any animal should. Then came the twist nobody expected. 3 weeks after the fire, as repairs began on the house and their lives settled into a fragile normal, Alina took Liam for a checkup. Dr. Rhodes, their longtime pediatrician, frowned slightly as she reviewed Liam's chest x-rays, ordered more out of caution than concern. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "The smoke inhalation. It could have worsened an undiagnosed condition, but in Liam's case, it actually revealed something life-threatening." Alina's heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "He had a minor defect in one lung," Dr. Rhodes explained. "A weakness we wouldn't have spotted for another year at least. If the fire hadn't happened, and Thor hadn't pulled him out when he did, the combination of heat and inhalation could have led to a full collapse. But the early exposure, combined with immediate treatment, let us catch it in time. In a strange way, the danger saved him." Alina sat frozen. All this time she thought they had barely escaped tragedy, but now she realized they had stumbled straight through it and landed on a miracle. Thor hadn't just saved Liam from flames. He had pulled him into a future he never would have reached otherwise. When she told Caleb that night, his eyes welled up. He didn't speak. He just walked to the window, where Thor now sat watching. The stars, his body still healing, his posture still alert. "He knew," Caleb whispered. Somehow, that dog knew. By the time the town held its modest ceremony a week later, word of Thor's act had spread. News outlets ran the story. Social media lit up with photos of Thor beside Liam, tail wagging, nose gently pressed to the baby's cheek. People who had feared dogs began writing letters of thanks. Animal shelters saw a rise in German Shepherd adoptions, each one captioned with a single name, Thor. But to Alina and Caleb, none of that mattered as much as what they saw in their own home. A dog who lay beside their baby every night, breathing, in sync. A guardian who watched over their son not because he was told to, but because he chose to. And when Liam took his first step, one tiny, wobbly move forward, it was Thor he walked to, arms outstretched, laughter bubbling up from his chest. Caleb captured the moment on camera, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. A fire, a whisper in the night, a silent protector dragging life from death's doorstep. And now, the first steps of a boy who might never have walked them at all. That night, as they tucked Liam into bed, Alina leaned down and kissed Thor on the snout. "You didn't just save our son," she whispered. "You saved our faith in love, in loyalty, in you." And Thor, ever silent, blinked once. Then he closed his eyes and let out the deepest, most contented sigh they'd ever heard. The kind only a hero earns. The ceremony was modest, but sincere. Folding chairs lined up under the town's only pavilion, homemade banners fluttering in. The wind and dozens of familiar faces from the neighborhood gathered not for a political cause or festival, but for a dog. Not just any dog. Thor, the one who ran into fire and came out carrying the most precious life in that entire town. Liam was in his father's arms, dressed in a little blue sweater with a stitched T over his chest, Alina's quiet tribute to the animal who had changed everything. Thor stood beside them with a soft blue ribbon around his neck and a harness that said Guardian, though he no longer needed a title to prove it. The whole town already knew. Mayor Cortland stepped to the mic with tears in her eyes. "We gather today to honor a life, but more importantly, the one who gave it back. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wear fur, and some don't bark. They act." There was applause, but Thor didn't react. He just sat calmly, scanning the crowd with soft, alert eyes. He wasn't interested in medals. He was watching Liam, who had reached down to gently tug at his ear, laughing without a care. For Thor, that was enough. Caleb and Alina didn't speak at the ceremony. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they knew no words would ever capture what Thor had done for their family. There were things beyond language, things that lived only in the space between one heartbeat and the next. A breath stolen in the night, a paw print by the crib, a baby saved by instincts no one could explain. But back home, in the quiet of the Yao restored living room, they told the story in their own way. They framed the singed collar Thor wore that night and hung it beside Liam's first footprint, not as a decoration, but as a vow, a reminder of what they almost lost and who brought them back from the edge. Time passed. The fire damage faded into memory. The nightmares softened, but one thing remained unshakable. Liam and Thor, side by side, always. Liam's first real word wasn't mama or dada. It was toe, a soft, half-formed sound but unmistakably pointed at the shepherd who had refused to let death win. And from that moment, they were inseparable. Liam learned to crawl by chasing Thor's tail. He learned to walk by gripping the dog's back like a railing. And he learned to laugh in ways that melted every lingering shadow of fear from his parents' hearts. One rainy afternoon, Caleb found a soggy envelope wedged beneath their mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single note and a photograph. The note read, "I abandoned my shepherd when I couldn't afford to feed myself, but I saw the news. I recognized him. His name was Thor then, too. I thought I lost everything. Turns out, he was never really lost." The photo was old. Thor, as a puppy, sitting beside a young man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, both of them leaning against a train station wall. There was love there, and something else, regret. Caleb showed the letter to Alina, and for a long moment, neither said a word. Then she whispered, "He was always trying to save someone." And it was true. Thor's loyalty hadn't been born from training or commands. It was something deeper, something he had carried from his earliest days, waiting for the right moment to prove it. When Liam turned 3, they let him walk Thor around the block. Just the two of them, with Caleb watching from a short distance. Neighbors paused to take pictures. Some even cried. A child leading a dog that had once pulled him from fire. A boy who had no idea how close he had come to being a headline instead of a miracle. Years passed, but the story never grew old. And neither did the bond. Eventually, Thor's muzzle grayed. His legs slowed. But he never stopped watching Liam. Never missed a bedtime story. Never refused a soft blanket by the boy's feet. He aged with dignity, with love, and with the quiet knowledge that his work was never really done. On a cold winter morning, when Liam was 7, Thor didn't get up from his bed. He lay still, his eyes gentle but tired, his breathing slow and even. Liam knelt beside him without fear, as if he somehow knew. "It's okay," he whispered. "You can rest now." Thor closed his eyes. One last breath, one last sigh, and then peace. They buried him beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, the same place Liam had taken his first steps. Alina planted wildflowers. Caleb carved a stone. Here lies Thor, the dog who saw before anyone else, the friend who didn't need words to speak, the hero who didn't wait to be asked. And every year after that, on the anniversary of the fire, Liam would sit by that tree and read aloud from a little book he wrote. It didn't have chapters. It didn't need an ending, because Thor's story, like all the greatest ones, was never about how it ended. It was about how it saved.